American doing a very American thing in a place that is not America with people who are not American, and you'll see the results for yourself. So we're going to slide this video over. This actually is a buddy of mine. They are in Burma, and my friend is 6 foot tall and 250 pounds, and they put on a big worship crusade, and he was getting very excited about it, and he forgot some of his cultural sensitivity. So please watch this video. Here we go. He's the big guy there. That's okay. No, he landed on about 7 little Burmese people and crushed them flat. Because, again, he was not very culturally sensitive, but thankfully no one was seriously injured. And again, he was an American doing a very American thing in a place that was not America with people who weren't ready for it.
But
So,
I'm American. If you do that on top of me, you're going down on the floor.
his name is Chris Hart. He's a buddy of mine. We went to college together. He's doing tons of great stuff. But for a moment there, he thought, man, this is so great. I just want to crowd surf, and jumped off onto these Burmese people. And if any of you have ever been to Southeast Asia or that Burma, Thailand area, people over there are very small, right? And he's very large. And so it's just not going to work. You should follow that. I got to go to Thailand, and I loved it because I was like the big guy. And in America, I'm the small guy. But over there, walking down the street, I was like, wow, I'm just about as tall as everybody here. And it was just wonderful for me. I love Thailand. But today we're talking about cultural sensitivity. Our culture and those who are sensitive to it. And one more time, I just want to go through everywhere where we're going. So when I point to your table, shout out where you're going on your trip. Belize. Guatemala. Mexico. Guyana. Vermont. YWAM. YWAM where? Awesome. Nepal. Haiti. Wonderful. So we want to be sensitive to all these different places. The last trip I went on was to North Carolina. And you might think, okay, do we need to be culturally sensitive to go from New York to North Carolina? Yeah. Yes, we do. And especially because it was a team of teenagers, and we were going to a place that pretty much everybody there was 50 and over. So we had some generational cultural sensitivity that we need to train in, so that we didn't just, be typical teenagers. So, let's go to our ultimate example of cultural sensitivity. Why do we want to do this? It's because Jesus was the best at this. And we do everything Jesus does, and we follow in his footsteps. And Jesus was amazingly culturally sensitive. Before we get to that slide though, my grandfather, he had an interesting life. Made some poor choices when he was young. He divorced my grandmother, I think when he was around 35. And then due to alcoholism, lost his eyesight, became blind. Got remarried, but then his new wife died, so he was widowed. He's living alone, and my family really wanted to reach out to him. One week, some people broke into his house and kind of roughed him up and stole some things out of his house. And you can imagine, being an elderly blind person, that would be a very terrifying event. So I'm going over there to visit after this happened, and I come up to the screen door and I knock on the door, and immediately I can tell that my grandfather's very nervous. He doesn't recognize who I am. Obviously he can't see me, but he's not recognizing my voice. And so I'm saying, Grandpa, it's me, Joel. And he's getting angry. He's saying, who's there? What do you want? This is my grandfather. And so it's me, Joel. I'm here to check on you. How are you doing? Who are you? What do you want? He was confused. So I took a bit of a risk. And I opened the screen door, and I still to this day I remember walking into his kitchen, and he kind of tensed up, and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, it's me, your grandson, Joel. And all of a sudden all the tenseness melted away, and he goes, oh, how you doing? I'm so glad you're here, right? And we had this great time. But there was a very tense moment where he wasn't quite understanding what was going on, and it was very confusing. In the same way, God had spoken to his people for years. trying to get them to understand who he is and what he's all about. And time again, people, they just didn't understand. Until Jesus came in the flesh, ultimate example of cultural sensitivity. He put on flesh and walked among us. And then when he reached out and touched people, they went, I get it. I get it now. I understand who you are and what you're all about. So we want to be like Jesus. Thankfully, we all already have flesh. And in this case, it's a really good thing. I'll explain some of that later. So Jesus was culturally sensitive in our human culture. He also operated to Jews, ministered to Jews within their cultural framework. So he understood the Jewish culture and operated within those rules. But then he also knew people's hearts within their personal culture. I think of the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a Jew, so Jesus understood that part of his culture. But Zacchaeus also was a chief tax collector and was an outcast from all of his friends because he sided with the Romans and took money from them. So his rejection was kind of warranted, but nevertheless he was rejected. And Jesus knew that. And so when Jesus comes to see Zacchaeus, the first thing he says is, Zacchaeus, come down out of that tree. I'm going to hang out with you today, when no one else would. Right? And so Jesus understood where he was, his specific culture, where he needed Christ. And he went right to that spot. So there's 3 levels of culture, and I'm going to show you a diagram in a little bit that's going to help you understand that. But Jesus did that. And he also communicated incredible sacrificial love that transcends all cultural barriers. Every time someone hears the story of Jesus' death on the cross for them, there's a big question mark. Why would you do that? That's why a lot of times on our mission trips we do service projects. Because what it does is it opens doors to people because they can't fathom, why would you raise all this money to go overseas and not go to all of these beautiful touristy areas, but to go to the little villages and serve people? It blows their minds because we have a great message that we want wrapped in that sacrificial love. So, interesting question for you. Would Paul, the apostle, does anyone else need a handout, by the way? I'm going to put a bunch on the table over here. Would Paul, the apostle of Christ, be a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan? I'll give you a few seconds to discuss amongst yourselves and tell your table your answer. Everybody say what their answer was? Did you guys tell each other what you thought? Okay. And of course, we know that the answer is neither. He would be a Detroit Tigers fan, because I'm from Detroit. But no, think about that question, and we're going to come back to it at the end. And it might seem like a simple, silly question, but it kind of encapsulates cultural sensitivity. So, what is cultural sensitivity? It is essentially change. Changing the way you act, react, eat, sleep, relate, discuss, walk, talk, live, in order to not misrepresent the gospel and in order to open doors for the gospel to be heard. It's change. And on a short-term trip, you can do it. You can actually change because you're powered by love for the people that you're going to reach. When you love someone, you'll do things that you normally wouldn't do. My little 2-year-old is sitting right over there in the corner. That's Noelle and my wife Stephanie. And I can tell you that I've done things in the last 2 years I never thought I would do for that 2-year-old, but I love her so much. Thinking about diapers, right? Things that I thought I would never be able to do. But when you love someone, you're able to change. So, however, we're going to talk a lot about cultural sensitivity, but here's some like ground rules. 1, you never compromise biblical morals or team safety. Those 2 things come first. So if in the culture it's really cool to like separate individually and just go off by yourself into some forest that has wolves, don't do it, right? We're not compromising team safety or our biblical morals. And you don't have to agree to America bashing, but there's a special way that you want to get out of those conversations. So, sometimes America is seen in a lot of different ways overseas, and sometimes you'll have a conversation with a person, and they'll bring up how much they don't like America. And this happened to me in Egypt, and thankfully, the Lord definitely ordained this. We had a training that morning about what to do if someone says that they don't like America. When I went to Egypt, George Bush was our president, and the Egyptians hated George Bush, obviously because of the Iraq War. And so here I am talking to these Muslims, trying to tell them about Jesus, and the first thing they say to me, I'm like, hi, how are you? Jesus loves you. And they say, I hate George Bush, right? It's not a good footing in order to preach the gospel. And so they just trained us that morning. They said, here's what you do. Egyptians hate George Bush, but they also hate their own president. So what you do is you say, well, do you like your president? And they go, oh no, our president's worse. We don't like him at all. And then you say, well, let's let the politicians be politicians. And we're just citizens. Can't we just have a talk? And what you do is you want to bring the story about what you're talking about back to their personal story and your personal story. And stay away from those big philosophical or political talks that can kind of disrupt your whole goal for being there, which is communicating the gospel. Take a look at this picture here. Why do we need cultural sensitivity? This is obviously a poster that's put up somewhere in America. It says, do not stand on the toilet seat or bowl. The bowl may break and you may hurt yourself. And as Americans, we look at this and we go, who in their right mind would climb up on a toilet seat and then fall off and hurt themselves or break the toilet seat? Who would do that, right? This seems so silly. Did we really need to put this sign up? And obviously the answer is yes, because the sign's there, so enough times this happened. And why is this? It's because most, obviously Americans, we use the restroom this way, but pretty much the rest of the world, they use the restroom this way because it's often just a hole in the ground. And this is much more comfortable if there's a hole in the ground rather than sitting on the floor. So, we look at this and we look at this and we say, these people must not have any sense. And that's exactly what Americans look like when they go overseas. They do things like sit on the floor, right, when they use the restroom. Or we do different things, and the people there are just like, you have no clue. And here you're going to tell me about Jesus. Why would I listen to you if you have no clue how to live here? So let the local culture dominate. This is something that could be difficult for some of us if we are strongly opinionated or if we really love our personal culture, then we might have a hard time doing this. But you want to let the local culture dominate. So if we're going to Belize, we want to do things the way that Belize people do things. If we're going to Vermont, there's people there who do things a certain way, and so we want to do them that way. The people at YWAM, there's going to be a specific way that they want you to do things, and we want to do it that way. Take the attitude of a learner and learn a new way to live. When I was in northern Thailand, we were building about a 10-foot brick wall at a girls' orphanage, and this old Thai man was showing us how to put the bricks on. We mixed the cement ourselves. It was a great experience, and he was using tons of mortar in between the bricks. I mean, just so much. And because we were mixing the cement ourselves and it took a lot of work, we thought, do we really need to use that much mortar? So, when he would kind of supervise us, and then when he kind of walked away, we'd use less mortar, right, in between the two bricks and stack them up. And it was looking great. It even looked a little better because instead of these big globs of mortar sticking out from the wall. And we thought, you know what, we're doing this much more efficient, and we're really, the Americans are coming through to save the day. Look at this awesome wall we built, and with less mortar, we saved them money. Like 2 days later, there was a thunderstorm, and the whole wall fell down. And it just struck us like, if we had only done it the way that the guy that lived there, who had been doing this year after year after year, if we had done it that way, things would have worked out great. So take the attitude of a learner. When you guys go on your trip, you're there to be giving, listening, humble, caring, and serving. And again, all of these open doors for ministry. Right? Take a look at that list there. The reason why we have cultural sensitivity training is because Americans have a tendency to be perceived as selfish and greedy, loud and obnoxious, prideful, and rude. Just want to let you know. That's how we tend to look in other cultures. And here's why. We look selfish and greedy because we're used to overabundance. Think about when your family goes out to Carrabba's. I know this is what happens when my family goes out to Carrabba's. The first thing that happens is someone brings over a big bowl of bread, right? And everybody just throws their hand in, grabs one, maybe someone grabs two. You just clear it out. You don't even care if someone didn't get a piece yet. Because you can just 2 words to the waiter and what's going to happen? A whole another bowl is going to come by. and then you get a whole another bowl after that. And so Americans are overseas, and we sit down for a meal, and everyone just dives in and takes as much as they want, not realizing that's all that there is. Greedy. Sometimes we are, sometimes it's just because we're used to there's always more. And overseas, there's not always more. Loud and obnoxious. We are the party country. We like to party. We're the land of fireworks, July 4th. We're the land of rock and roll. And so sometimes, especially in airports and things like that, you'll have this massive group. I'm thinking, how many are on your team over there in Guatemala? 20, you said, or something? Okay, you guys are going to be moving through the airport like a tidal wave, right? And everyone's just going to be like, whoa, what is this? And sometimes that's good. We have a team here at the school, Undignified, that goes down to Mexico. And they have an appropriate use of being loud and obnoxious. They bring a whole stomp kit, if you're familiar with that artistic group Stomp. They bring it all down to Mexico, they set it up in a square, and they make tons of noise, and they're loud and obnoxious. But it's approved by the leadership and by the contact, because everybody hears this racket going on, and they come over to see what's going on, and then they put those away and they preach the gospel. Right? So there's times to be loud and obnoxious. Maybe not obnoxious. But it needs to be channeled by team leadership and by your contact. Prideful. Americans tend to be seen as prideful, and that's because America, in a lot of ways, is much more comfortable than most of the world. And so it's easy to talk about how amazing America is. America smells just so much better than this place over here. America has such wider roads than this place over here. American cars are so much bigger than this place over here. And so we have to be careful of that, because it can just come across as prideful. And then rude. I think the reason why Americans are perceived as rude is simply by lack of knowledge. We don't understand what's okay and what's not okay. We don't take the time to learn what's okay and what's not okay, and so we seem very rude. Case in point, again in Thailand. This was a crazy trip. I don't know why all these stories are about Thailand. But in Thailand, feet are considered very dirty. They don't wash their feet a whole lot, and they wear sandals everywhere they go. So feet are just like the worst. And so it's really rude to point with your feet. Like if someone says, where's my purse? And you kind of do one of these things, that's like vulgar and horrible. If you point at someone else, like, hey, him over there. If you touch someone with your feet, that would be considered, I can't believe you did that, right? Well, my team, we were bonding with the local people so much that they bought us all these great bracelets. And so everyone had their bracelets on. And one kid on the team, we didn't see his bracelet. We said, where's your bracelet? And he had put it around his ankle. So to show everybody, he whipped it up onto the dinner table and slapped it down. Take a look at this. And of course, our team was well trained, so we all went, what are you doing? You know, and because we had such a big reaction, the locals just laughed it off, like, oh, silly Americans. But if we didn't know that, we could have really offended them and left our foot up there for quite a while. So here's what I want you to think about. A tale of three cultures. We have the human culture, the regional culture, and the personal culture. And that's kind of the route you have to take. Our goal is to be successful in personal culture, because just like Jesus with Zacchaeus, we want to reach people, an individual right where they're at. But in order to get there, we're going to go through our human culture, which all humans have in common, our regional culture, which is different for everywhere, and a personal culture, which is kind of different for each person. So let's talk about the human culture. This is the greatest gift to the missionary. Because these are things that everybody has in common no matter where you are on the planet. So, self-centeredness sends a really negative image no matter where you're at. When you see people that are selfish, no matter where you're at, they think, this person does not have character. Also, love and service sends a powerful, positive message. People react when they feel loved, no matter what culture you're in. Sacrifice is the ultimate expression of love. So, again, like I said before, that's why we do a lot of service projects. That's why we want to sacrifice while we're there. John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. That's why the story of Christ is so powerful in every single culture. Just this last February, my last mission trip was to JARS in North Carolina, and they showed us how they do Bible translation for all of the different languages they're trying to reach. There's about 7,000 languages in the world, and about 2,000 of them still don't have one word about Jesus in that local language. And so at JARS, they're trying to make that number 0, that every language has a word about Jesus in it. And it's amazing when they bring these videos of a completely separate culture, ancient Jewish culture and they translate it into a modern dialect in some remote village, and the people still respond to the message of Jesus died for me. Sacrificial love is powerful, and that's what you guys are bringing to the world. Next part about human culture is that music, children, laughter, sports, and food leap across cultural barriers. And so we want to use these things to bond with people. That's why we always have meals with the locals, because you bond. I always laugh, whenever you take two families of different cultures and stick them in the same room, the adults always kind of look at each other kind of awkwardly at first, and the kids grab each other by the hand and run off. And it's just, children know how to do it instinctively. They jump across barriers, and so we need to do that too. Music, enjoying music with each other, laughter, playing sports. This is how you jump across those cultural barriers. The great thing about the human culture is that you can connect with people who speak a different language, think differently about the world, and live a drastically different lifestyle than you. You can do it. All people at their core have dreams, aspirations, joys, fears, struggles, and emotions. And a lot of them are often common. No matter where you are in the world, mothers still worry about their children. Right? And this common bond they can have. Fathers still want to give their children a better life than they had when they grew up, no matter where you are. So look for those common experiences when you're trying to bond. Now we're going to move to the regional section. This is where it gets interesting. This is where you guys do a lot of research. This is where you look into what are the normal cultures for the area that you are going to. So communities have different rules for operating. And you need to study what the rules are. And you have to be thinking and flexible in country, because you can't possibly know all the rules before you go. You're going to really rely on team leadership to give you those reminders before you go into a situation. And you're also going to rely on contacts, the people who are there all the time who live there. Those are the people you're going to rely on to help you navigate some of these things that you might not be able to learn before you go. I'm a big proponent of learning at least 2 words or 2 phrases for whatever culture you're going to, and that is thank you and I'm sorry. Because if you mess up culturally, you do something like in Thailand, you throw your foot up on the dinner table, right? You want to be able to apologize culturally. You want to be able to say I'm sorry in their language. That's how you make up for that. When people are you're going to be amazed at the people on how giving they are to you despite them having a fraction of what you have. And you want to be able to learn to say thank you in their language, because you want to be culturally thankful. You know you're doing this right when you are mistaken for the people that you're trying to reach. This happened to me in Ukraine. I love Ukraine. I've been there 3 times. And as I got more comfortable with the culture, I found myself spending more time with the people there and less time with my team. Right? Because sometimes as our team moves, we tend to stay, like we're here to witness to these people, and our team just kind of moves as a clump. Like our clump is going to come talk to your clump. Hope that's okay. And we want to break away from that. We want to be comfortable just being with the people. So something that happens regularly in Ukraine is the police come by and they look at the foreigners and they ask for their passports to make sure they have their visas. And so it just gave me such a thrill to be in this big group. And they come around and they're checking all the passports of all the foreigners, and they skip right over me. And I'm like, yes, I have arrived. They have not asked for my passport. They think I'm one of them. This is what we want. And people feel loved when their culture is embraced with open arms. You know, typical teenage boy-mother relationship, that can be a difficult time where there's misunderstandings. And one time in my life, I really felt like my mother loved me. This might sound a little weird to you, but I was sitting there like a normal teenage boy playing video games, right? Just chilling. And my mother came by and she sat down next to me and just sat there. She didn't say a word. She just wanted to hang out and see what I was doing. And it really weirded me out. I was like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I just want to see what you're doing and hang out with you. And it wasn't to check up on me to see if the game was okay or not. She just wanted to understand my world. And I literally put the remote down and said, how are you doing today? And it just responded. It made me feel so loved because she entered into my world. And that's what we're going to do when we go to our individual places. Let's talk about food for a second. Food is a difficult one. when you go overseas. Sometimes you're not used to the food that's there. Turning your nose up at that food is an insult no matter where you go. How many of you have ever turned your nose up at something that maybe your mother made, and then you saw quickly that she was insulted, right? She lets you know pretty fast. So no matter where you go, you have to be careful how you react when food is put on your table. You need to eat what you're given, and check with the team leader for portion size and seconds when you're serving yourself. Right? We're used to overabundance. So this has happened to me before. We have a team of 10 going to dinner at someone's house. The first guy gets up there, puts everything on his plate that he wants, goes and sits down. The next person comes up and says, "Where's the food?" Right? "Is there more in the back?" And it's like, no, that's all that there is. And so we have to go, and this is a really embarrassing part, we go to that guy and we say, "Go put all your food back because you took too much." Right? Americans have huge portion sizes. Here's a little hint. If you're walking around and everybody seems skinnier than you, then they are probably eating a lot less than you, right? In these third world countries. So, be careful of that. And sometimes there's not seconds, and so it's an awkward situation when you go and ask for seconds and the person doesn't have any more food. Check with your team leader first. You have to plan ahead for sticky situations, such as maybe there's water in a village that you really shouldn't drink. You know, if the contact tells you don't drink the water, don't try to be culturally sensitive and drink it. It means you're going to be sick for the rest of your trip. Whatever your contact tells you, you have to really abide by. And with truly difficult food, that's where the team situation comes in. My brother-in-law took a team to Tanzania, all men, right? All like, yeah, we're going to go to Tanzania, we're going to do this. And the hardest thing for them was the food because every village, they made a little village stops all along the way, and they all fed them the same thing. I can't remember the name of it, but he said it was kind of like snot. All right? Like a thick snot. And it wasn't snot, but it was actually a high carb, like rice type product, but the way they prepared it, they couldn't stomach it. But a couple guys could on the team, about 3 of them. It's a team of 10. So this is where the support comes in, right? They show up to the village, they all go, "Oh, thank you so much," and then they start sneaking it under the table to the guys that could handle it, and they would just down the whole thing. You have to have accountability and support when you come to food. Accountability is great because you're going to catch things with each other first before the locals do. You might see one of your team members start to kind of like, "What is that?" and they put it down on the table, and that's the part where you kick them under the table, right? You give them the big fake smile like, "It looks great," and then they go, "Oh yes, I remember sitting with Joel in conference room 2 and 3, and you put the fake smile on and go, 'Oh, this looks great.'" That's what we need to do. Accountability and support. For your dress, remember your modest is not always their modest. I was just thinking about this as I went through this PowerPoint again. You know, America's culture has changed so much in the last 50 years, in the last 100 years. You know, it used to be scandalous, like incredibly scandalous, for women to show their ankles in public. That was like, I can't believe you just did that, right? Cover that up. Nowadays, we don't even have to talk about what America's culture is used to. But you know, a lot of cultures around the world, they don't change as fast. America just likes to keep pushing the envelope, and other cultures are more content where they're at. Case in point, a small village in eastern Ukraine. If you went and visited there today, it looks like it's straight out of the 1950s. I love this place. All of the cars look like they're from the 1950s. All of the houses from the 1950s. All of the dress. And it's because they got that culture and then they just weren't as influenced as much by what else came after that. Everyone's just content to be right there. It's a wonderful place to be. With the times and the people we are going to may not see it that way. Or their culture may just be much more modest. And you have to think about the activity that you're going to be doing too. In some cultures, when you go to church, that means floor-length skirt and headscarf. But you'll see those same people on the street a day later, and they'll be wearing not a whole lot. So you have to be very careful with the activity. Remember, it's not about you. It's about them and what you're going to do when you're there. Talk about gender relations. You have to be careful because that's a real hot-button topic for different cultures. Different cultures have different rules about gender relations. These are just some examples that kind of help pique your interest to go and do research to find out more about where you're going. In Africa, sometimes males will walk hand in hand in order to show friendship. Simple friendship, nothing weird about it. Okay, but if you don't know that, it'll be really weird for you. Case in point, when I was there, it was the end of the trip, right? We've been there for 2 weeks, I think. We had really deposited into this young man. I think he was like 16. Our team was just graduating high school, so we were 18-year-olds, and he was a new Christian. And so we really helped him a lot, realized that there's other people in the world that love Jesus, and it was a great bonding experience for those 5 days. And so as we're walking down the road, I'm walking next to him, and he reaches down and grabs my hand, right? And we're not talking like pray in church kind of grab, like finger lock, interlocking, right? And in that moment, there's so many thoughts that go through your mind, right? But thankfully, they had trained us ahead of time that is just a simple way of showing friendship. Like guys in America would punch each other in the arm, okay? Guys in Africa walk hand in hand. So instead of punching him in the face or doing something to react to that, like, what are you doing, right? Which would have completely ruined all of the ministry we had up to that point, I just reminded myself of what this means, where I'm at, and walked with him down the road. And I could tell my youth pastor was just giggling his head off way behind, because he knew what I was feeling on the inside, but what I showed on the outside was different. In some places, speaking to someone of the opposite gender may be seen as inappropriate, so you have to be careful of this. Same gender ministry is always the safest way to go, and especially with your teen group, what's always really good is to do one guy and one girl ministering together, because you don't know what situation is going to come up. Like if there's a prayer line, you don't know always who's going to be in that prayer line to come up to you. So if you guys partner together, you can easily switch back and forth to make sure there's no awkward situations there. Let's talk about some social interactions and nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is easily interpreted and misinterpreted. Okay, we see this guy's face here. We all know exactly what he's thinking, even if we don't speak his language. He can speak any language in the world, but we know what he is communicating. And so you have to be careful of all that nonverbal communication. Don't give away your thoughts with your face. And hand gestures, you have to be very careful with hand gestures, because it might not mean what you think. I can think of 4 or 5 hand gestures off the top of my head that are perfectly okay to do in America, and then overseas would be considered the same as the middle finger here, right? So you have to be careful. A simple one. What does this mean? Peace, right? This is very offensive in France, and it comes from the wars that they would have between the English and the French. Yes, way back when. When the English would capture the French in the Middle history, yes, it means victory in England. When they would win the battles, they would take all of the archers who would pull back the arrows with these bows, and so that they couldn't fight in the next war, they would cut off these 2 fingers, right? And that way these archers would be useless in battle from their point. So when England would win wars, they would go like this to France: "Hi, we still have our 2 fingers and you don't." So if you go to France today and give someone a peace sign, it's a really big insult, so don't do it. This could also be true for areas that have a strong French influence, which is a lot of parts of Africa, right? So be careful. Smiles are generally positive. You won't get in trouble for smiling, so that's just the safest way to go. Get that smile going. You need to practice. Practice those smiles. Let's talk about gifts. In some places, complimenting someone's property really means asking for it, and because the people you're coming to visit are usually very giving people, they'll give it to you, and then you feel really bad because it might be something that they really can't afford to give away. So be careful complimenting someone else's property. Also, giving gifts sometimes puts cultural pressure for someone to give a gift back, and not just like, oh, I feel like I want to give them something. It's more of like you have to give them something back of commensurate value. So we have backpacks, and we might have a watch or a pocket knife or something like that, and when we give that to them, in the back of our minds, it's, when I get back, I'll run to the store and buy another one. But for them to give something up like that, that might be like the family heirloom that they can't replace. And so you have to be very careful in giving gifts. So I am the master at sneaky gifts, right? If you go out to dinner with me and I want to pay, I'm going to go say I have to use the restroom, and I'm going to go and pay, right, when I go, so that we don't have to fight about it when we get back to the table. And then when the check never shows up, I'm just going to shrug my shoulders and say, I don't know what happened. They said we don't have to pay, right? You got to think like that if you're going to give gifts overseas. And so you can delay the reception of the gift, put a note on it, this is for so-and-so. Or give it to them when you're on the way to the airport, when you get on the plane so they don't have time to get you something back. But be sneaky when you give gifts, because we want to leave stuff. Great idea is to take tons of clothes that you're okay with leaving there. One of the greatest experiences I ever had in my life was going to Ukraine with all my stuff. And then while I was there, leaving 2 suitcases full of stuff and just coming home with a little backpack. I don't know why, it was very cathartic for me because I felt like I was leaving a piece of myself there. But these people have nothing. And so simple things like clothes are worth so much to them that it's wonderful when we can just leave a lot of stuff there when we're there. So do that. And plus, when you leave lots of stuff, it makes room for souvenirs in your bags. All right, we talked about our human culture. That's what we all have in common. We talked about our regional culture that's specific to the place you're going. Now we're going to talk about personal culture, and that's where we get down to the individual. So every person is different. As much as you'll study, and as much as you'll prepare, when you're there, you have to think about the individual person in front of you. When people find out where you're from, they could be enamored. Oh, you're from America. Do you know George Clooney? Right? That's the question you're going to get. They could be standoffish, like my experience in Egypt. Oh, you're American? I want nothing to do with you. Or they could be indifferent. Oh, there's another foreign person. Who cares? Whatever it is, these are the people that you're going to reach. Neuro-linguistic programming, I put this fancy term up there just because I had to learn it once in college a long, long time ago, and I wanted to use it again, so that's why I put it up there. But it's this whole idea that people like people who are like them. People like people who are like them. So as silly as this may seem, if I'm going to go talk to a man about Jesus and he's sitting down, I'm going to sit down too, next to him, instead of standing over him and talking to him. If he's leaning against the wall, I'm going to lean against the wall too. Because I want to show him that I am just like him. Because in the idea of eternity and spiritual matters, it's true. I'm a sinner, he's a sinner. I need Jesus, he needs Jesus. If I've gotten saved, I'm going to heaven. He gets saved, he's going to heaven. So we want to show them that we are like them. I won't bore you with more research on that neuro-linguistic programming, but it's pretty fascinating on influencing others. So be the way they are, and that's going to help you reach their heart. Talking about personal, the second slide says, once you get to know someone and get to know their story, you can more easily identify with them and connect your witness for Christ to their life. And that takes time, and that takes listening, and that takes asking questions. We want to know about their life so we can connect our life to them and our witness for Christ. So how can you show them that you're just like them? Maybe they tell you, as you start, they realize that you're of a religious persuasion. Okay? They're probably going to share either some great things with you about their life or some really horrible things about their life. And so when they share a struggle that they're going through or a difficult time, that's the perfect time to share another personal struggle that you went through and what Jesus has to say about that. Because we want to connect with them wherever they're at. And just remember, you're going to look for individuals. In Christian circles, we call it a divine appointment. Right now, there's someone in Guatemala, there's someone in Mexico, there's someone in Guyana, there's someone at the YWAM base, someone in Vermont, and someone in Belize that you are specifically going to reach, that you're going to talk to. And they're there right now, waiting for you. And that's how you have to think about it, because you have to be aware and alert to look for that person that you can influence and you can witness to. You have to be sensitive to their needs and be on the lookout for them. I counted up the trips that I've been on, and I got to the number 11. I think I've been on 11 trips. And it's just great for me to look through those trips and to see how I matured in the process of going on trips. And I can definitely say my first trip, I was going on this trip because it was exciting and it was an adventure. I probably didn't care about the people too much. And that's sad, but it's the truth. And so we have to be people-focused. The reason why we're going is because there's specific people that you're going to reach. And while I was on my first trip in Africa, It was towards the end of the trip, and it was time for souvenirs, and I was so excited. Because in Africa, you can get a lot of cool souvenirs. And so we're at this place that kind of looked like the Grand Canyon. It's called the Three Rondables. Along the highway, there's just person after person, and they're all selling souvenirs, and all of them are exactly the same, but there's like 40 stations, and they all have exactly the same stuff, right? So which probably means there's one, for lack of a better term, souvenir warlord who's buying all this stuff and then getting these little village moms to come out and stand by the booth. So I go up there, and I'm so excited, totally forgotten about the reason why I'm there, and I'm looking for a great deal. I put on my haggling hat, right? I'm from Detroit, and so we pride ourselves on getting the best deal that we can. So I go up to her, and I'm picking out some of these little wooden statues of lions and hippos, and we start talking about price. And I'm like, I am going to get a great price for these, and I'm not going to let her, overcharge me. So she starts the bidding out at like 80, and I'm like, look at her, I'm like 35, right? And so she comes down, and I'm bargaining her down, we're going back and forth. And I can tell she's getting a little upset, but I'm like, I'm getting a great deal. And we get down to where she's at like 50 and I'm at 45. She's not budging and I'm not budging, and I'm just enjoying this experience, this haggling experience. We're going back and forth. And then finally she just gives in, all downcast. And I get my money, I run back to the minivan with all my stuff. And I'm so excited I got a great deal. And right at that moment, the Lord convicts my heart so severely. Because when I think about the money, currency translation between the two countries, the rand and the dollar, I was haggling over a couple bucks, right? And this lady is taking this money to go back to feed her kids. And here I am excited because I was able to talk her down a couple dollars. And the whole reason that happened was because I didn't care about her. I cared about my experience, my adventure. So I want to challenge you not to fall into that trap. Because that day she learned that Americans are stingy, that Americans are rude, obnoxious, and she probably, I don't know if she knew if we were just tourists or if we were missionaries. Hope she didn't know we were missionaries. Because if she did, then she would say, God's like that too. That they represent God, and this is how they're acting, that must be how their God is. I want no part of their God. That's a very sobering story of one of my first mistakes. I made many. But I regret that decision. You have to be careful that you don't get caught up in the experience and you're looking at the people. And that means every single time that you're with people. When you're flying to your country, when you're driving the car to the airport, that taxi cab driver, sometimes we forget those people. They're just as much the mission field as anyone else. The person you sit on the plane with as you fly to the country, that person may be the one person that you're going to witness that whole trip. And they're not even in the country that you're going to. So you have to look at every single person as an opportunity. Let's talk about your mission. Why are you doing this? If I could drill one thing into your head, it would be this first statement here. To serve the contact in their ministry to the people. That's the whole reason you're going. There's someone there who has a ministry that's already established that you're going to come in and support. And you have to be careful that you don't try to do your own thing to try to circumvent their ministry or do something that they don't want you to do. You need to serve, you need to help the contact the way they want to be helped. And you need to show the gospel before you preach the gospel. In Egypt, our missionary there, he used to be the head of the underground pastors in Egypt, but he wasn't allowed to be that anymore because people were not there to serve the contact. They kind of did their own thing. There was a big secretive meeting from the pastors late one night, and it was earlier in the day that they had gone and done ministry, and two missionaries were just there hanging out, and they were so excited to meet these Muslims that were interested in Jesus that they invited them to the pastors' meeting. And all of these pastors were underground pastors, right? So you can see that this is a really bad situation. So obviously these Muslim guys, they had feigned interest into Christianity, and instead of just showing up at the pastors' meeting, they brought the police, right, to break up these pastors. And so thankfully, my contact when I was in Egypt, he was escaped out the back so that their identities would not be known. And he has been outed, so he cannot do official ministry in Egypt. He just simply has to do humanitarian work. He can't have a religious affiliation. He still tries to sneak it in whenever he feels brave enough, but he's watched. And when we came to visit, he was watched, because when we would walk around, there would be two police officers that would follow us everywhere we went. And it was incredible to me. But because the people that were there didn't serve the contact, didn't follow his instruction, they really hurt his ministry. And so we have to be careful of that when we go. Because they'll be there after you leave. So we go back to this question. Would Paul, the apostle of Christ, be a Yankees fan or a Boston Red Sox fan? And I would argue that it would depend on who he was with. I think Paul would keep a Yankees cap in his trunk and a Boston Red Sox cap in his trunk. And when he drove through Boston, I think he'd throw that Red Sox cap on. And when he came up to New York, I think he'd throw that Yankee cap on. And here's why. In 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, Paul writes, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." So when we go to a country, we want to become like them so we can tell them about Jesus. Because all of the extra stuff, it doesn't really matter anyway. We want to forget what doesn't matter so that we can talk about what really matters. We want to forget about whether we like the food or not so that we can tell them about Jesus. How do we sustain all this? How do we make sure we can have all this information now? We've done our research. How are we able to actually decide, okay, I'm going to act differently. I'm going to change what I would want to do or how I normally act in order to minister to people? How do we do this? We stay eternity focused. That always brings everything into perspective. Okay, it doesn't matter if my water is a shade of brown. This is about eternity, right? And cultural sensitivity is guided by knowledge, and it's really powered by love. When you develop a love for a people, you're able to deal with things that maybe you would not deal with normally. And how do you develop love for people? You start right now by praying for them. Praying for people always creates a love because you're connecting with how God feels about them.